Well, it's Linda Lysakowski with our quick tip. And our question today comes from someone who works with volunteers in a nonprofit organization. And they're trying to figure out what's the best way to recognize those volunteers. Well, there are many things you can do to recognize volunteers: fundraising volunteers, program volunteers, administrative volunteers. The first and most important thing is to recognize that they are volunteers and thank them. People don't realize how great it feels just to be told thank you sometimes. And sometimes that's all the recognition that a volunteer will want. But there are other ways to do this. But before you start thinking about how you recognize volunteers, one of the things that's important is that you need to, in your database, code all your volunteers so that you know they're volunteers. I had a gentleman one time in a focus group. I was meeting with a group of people who volunteered for many different types of nonprofit organizations. And I asked them a question of how they felt if an organization they volunteered for asked them to contribute financially. Were they offended by this, or did they contribute? And I had a gentleman that told me something that I'll never forget. He said he doesn't get offended when he's asked to contribute financially, but he said he had an organization that which he volunteered for probably for about 20 years, and they put his name in the database just kind of along with everybody else, and they were sending out a direct mail acquisition letter to multiple people. And he got a letter that just said, Dear Joe, and it didn't indicate at all that he was a volunteer. And he was very insulted by that they didn't recognize his volunteer time and his efforts and all the years he had been volunteering. He said he would have given them money, but he was just insulted that they didn't recognize him as a volunteer. So make sure your volunteers are all coded in your database. And then you can think about doing maybe a volunteer recognition day where you have a luncheon or an outdoor picnic or whatever for all your volunteers and recognize them all at the same time. You also might want to recognize volunteers for the different aspects that they do. Program volunteers may be interested in getting something that's directly related to your program. If you, for example, are a children's organization, maybe a little drawing or something made by one of the kids in your program, because that's the area that they work in. Fundraising volunteers may look for other kinds of recognition. Maybe if they work for a business, you writing a letter to their boss thanking them for the volunteer time that your organization has received, and that goes a long way. Putting their names in a newsletter or on your website, if they give you permission to do that, of course. So there's many different things you can do to recognize volunteers, but the more personal you can make it and connect it with your organization, give them something that has meaning to your organization or has meaning to them personally. And again, top level volunteers you might want to recognize with more expensive gifts, more kind of a grandiose idea, but most people just want to be thanked and be recognized for what they're doing. So you can do a multitude of things. I think listing their names on your website is a great idea. One organization I know that had a lot of business people volunteer for their organization listed the names of their volunteers in the local business journal because that was read by other business people. And other businesses would say, hey, gee, maybe we ought to send some volunteers over there because look at all these businesses that are getting their name in the paper at no charge to them. So you can do various kinds of recognition. But remember that volunteers do want to be recognized and they certainly want to be thanked. Now, if you want more tips on working with volunteers and how to keep them involved in your organization, keep them coming back year after year, I do have a course called Build a Dream Team of Volunteers that talks about many aspects of volunteerism. It covers recruiting volunteers and training them, and it also covers recognizing fundraising volunteers. So you might want to think about taking that course to get some additional ideas on how you can recognize your volunteers.